Good evening, viewers and listeners. Welcome to the special podcast on Sports Star. Today we have Nandan Kamath. He's a good friend, and he's known. He's a well-known lawyer. Sports is very close to his heart, and I have worked with him on one of the committees with the sports ministry. And the subject here is this wonderful book called Boundary Lab. I mean, I have read lots of books in my life. This is one thing which stands out, and I can go back and visit this book to learn quite a few things about sports, sports administration, and so many aspects related to various games. And Nandan has worked very, very hard on this, fantastically researched, beautifully written because it's very easy to understand. And no wonder Rahul Dravid has given him a beautiful quote. It says, Boundary Lab takes you on an enlightening journey that will forever change the way you look at competitive sport. It's very, very true. Nandan has given some wonderful insight into, like I said, the world of sport. And we'll discuss about his book on this podcast. And I will strongly recommend every sports lover to buy this book. It has to be in your collection of books at home. So welcome, Nandan.
Thank you so much, sir. It's a real honor to be here. I was a young cricketer, but I was probably more known for collecting sports star posters. So my bedroom wall when I was young was like completely filled with sports star posters. So I certainly relived the sensation at that point of time. So it's a real honor to be on this podcast. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for agreeing to come on our show. Um, I mean, like I said, I don't know what prompted you. Obviously, it is your lifetime work, this book. It must have taken you a lot of time. So, the reason why you did the sport to begin with?
Yeah, so, I mean, honestly, I'm a huge lover of sport, and I've spent, I would say, the better part of the last 20 years working in Indian sport. And it just came together. It was a few years ago where I felt like there were lots of different things connecting in my head. I work in different aspects of sport. So I'm a lawyer. I've worked, like you said, with the government and committees with you. I also have run a couple of non-profit organizations. I've been deeply involved with the various cricket developments at the BCCI, the ICC. So all of this, when I saw this as a much larger landscape, a lot of different things started connecting in my head. And I felt like it was important, one, to communicate them, but also two, I think when you write, you actually have to have some clarity of thought. So it was actually a little bit of a process of like bringing my different insights in my own head together. So it, very personal journey of writing the book, obviously with a desire to communicate various ideas, which I hope inspire other people to actually care about sport in the same way that I did. Because I've got a lot of benefit from sport at a very personal level, at a professional level, at a community level. And I just feel like it's something that more and more people should have the chance to appreciate, enjoy, and benefit from.
Correct, Nandan. And apart from the fact that all your experience is 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 so beautifully given shape to this book, how long would you say it took you to do the research? Because it is monumental effort.
Thank you for saying that. I mean, from coming from you, that I grew up reading a lot of your work, and I wouldn't necessarily say it's been research. Sir. I think it was actually written alongside my work. So what happened is I actually had a chance to teach this course at the National Law School, which is I'm an alumnus of the law school, and I'd broken the topic up into things that I thought as a young student I would like to hear about and read about and just think about. So in some senses, the structure came through a teaching, but the actual work is I would say, an amalgamation of research, work I've done over the years, but also very practical experiences and a little bit of, I would say, personal opinion shining through where, I am at the end of the day a sports lover, so that vantage point as well. But I just like to say, as a lawyer, I've had a very unique vantage point on sport. And I think that informs this. I don't think it's a sports law textbook, or for that matter, only a sports book. But I would say it's a lawyer's insight into a much wider world, and really trying to bring sport from I would say, the margins of our public discourse to my belief that it should be part of the mainstream discourse of study, of discussion, of deliberation, and stakeholdership. All of us need to care about it.
Yeah. And Nandan, with your experience, you spent time with administrators, sportsmen, journalists, and so many other intellectuals who would have come in your life connected with sport, from the common man to those who have deep insight into different sports. So, what are your views on the quality of sports administration in India? Because you are really well qualified to talk on this subject.
I think it's a very critical point, and actually a subject matter that we must discuss. And in many ways, I would like to see a new breed of sports administrator take up the cudgels in Indian sport. And the hope is that this book actually inspires people to say this is potentially a place where it's worth contributing. So it's not just a tussle on the side, it's not just a matter of who gets selected here and there. These actually are significant decisions which impact the public domain in a very meaningful way. So I would say sports administration is not an easy job. So even putting the best of minds, putting the best of intent, it's not just about, I would say, administrative understanding or intent. It's actually a very difficult job, which is about balancing many, many different interests. There could be commercial interests, there could be governmental interests. So many things are happening, but it needs more than anything, I would say, an attitudinal shift. That as an administrator, you're not there in a position to actually serve your own interest, or for that matter, the player's interest. It's a much wider public interest. And that's where I feel over the last 8-10 years, you'll see that even the courts have understood that. So while administrators are in a private body, and sports is quite unique because all of these bodies are actually private bodies. They are either set up as Section 8 companies or societies or whatever else. But the courts have held that they play a public function. So even though they're private bodies, there's a public function they're operating. And the book was also an attempt to understand what is this public function and why is this a public domain? And it is not an easy job. I think the people who have tried it have done it, I would say, alongside other work, and done it perhaps with goodwill, perhaps not necessarily always with goodwill. And I don't think it has been taken in the manner of trusteeship. And I would just like that positionality to change in terms of why do people get into sports administration. I think more and more people need to see it as public service rather than an opportunity to move their own private domains forward.
Yeah. So Nandan, what in your opinion is good governance? I mean, how would you describe good governance in a particular sport?
Yeah, so actually, this is one of the topics I explore in one of the chapters, and just recognizing that there is no static concept of good governance. Each situation needs a balancing of multiple different interests. So I would say good governance involves an understanding of the various interests. There could be commercial interests, there could be sporting interests, it could be integrity. There are lots of pulls and pushes on any given sport. You name a sport, there's a desire for more people to make money, including developing the sport. There's integrity challenges. People are trying to take unfair advantage. There is government wants something to happen. There's the public asking and clamoring for different things. So actually, good governance is understanding that there are multiple different people involved in this sphere, understanding where they're coming from, and understanding that all of them have a legitimate claim on sport. But how do you bring all of those things together, making sure that perhaps commercial interests don't always trump values of sport and integrity? And for that matter, just what the public wants isn't not necessarily what sport has to give. Sometimes sport has to go against the grain. But I would say it is an element of this notion of trusteeship. And when you understand trusteeship, and the beneficiary in this case is the public interest. So putting the public interest first, but recognizing that there are multiple challenging balances to be had between commerce, sport, integrity, fairness, and many different aspects. So I would say there is no static notion of good governance, but it's about communication, it's about understanding, it's understanding interests, and then eventually balancing it in a way where you put sport first. So it's sporting interest that trumps always, whatever the decisions are being made and the trade-offs being made along the way.
Yeah. And Nandan, one aspect which has always intrigued me is this conflict of interest. So when I see people like Rahul Dravid, VVS Lakshman, or Anil Kumble, Sachin Tendulkar, men of high integrity, uh, being I mean, when you say they have a conflict of interest. So how do you how do you draw a line? I mean, do you think that these folk, the names which you have mentioned, would do something which will go against the benefit of the sport? So why do we need this conflict of interest clause?
Yeah, so I think, sir, over time, sport has not been seen as a public good. It has not been seen as public domain. So when something is private, you can do five things, even if they conflict with each other. One private person can waive the conflict on behalf of another private person. But when there's a recognition that, let's say, the selection of an Indian team involves a public function that you're carrying out. It is not just the interest of the players that is involved. There are many other players who are not even being considered, and their interests are involved. Public transparency is involved. So when these private roles take on a public hue, there is a potential that you're bringing your private interest into decision making, and that's where this concept of conflict of interest comes in. Now, historically, Indian sport has not been very cognizant of this, so people may do multiple different things at the same time, and in fact, that has been par for course of any sports administrator, anyone owning a team, any selector. These have not been professionalized jobs, but if you look over the last 15 years in particular after the IPL, these are very professionalized jobs where people are getting paid full-time salaries, right? So they're getting paid for more or less the full year. And at that point, it forces you almost to pick which corner you're in, because can you be a selector and have your son being considered for selection at the same time? Can you be running an academy and then also being a national selector at the same time? Because I mean, you have private interests. All of us have private interests. It is not wrong to have your private interests. But when you are in a public position, you have to leave your private interest behind and act as a public servant of sorts. So that is the real challenge when as you're professionalizing a sport, there's perhaps a less sophisticated understanding of concepts like of conflict of interest, and people get caught up almost unknowingly in some cases, and other people actually don't even care and sort of move through conflict of interest situations simply because they can and there's nobody to check them. So there are multiple different types. Some may be just from a lack of awareness, understanding, and knowledge, and others could be quite flagrant, saying, okay, I mean, I have a conflict of interest, what are you going to do about it? So it's about parsing those two and finding meaningful ways to actually overcome this. So when you're moving from an amateur setup to a highly professionalized setup, things like codes of ethics, conflict of interest become essential and critical, because you're dealing with a much larger piece of the pie. Not that they weren't important before, but they come into the spotlight much more in this professionalized environment.
So sports ethics applies only to sportsmen, not to administrator?
No, and I think that is a critical point now. So what we've seen is a couple of cases where sports administrators have been held as public servants under the Prevention of Corruption Act. So being treated similarly to government servants, which is a very interesting element. So you're expecting certain standards of sports people, but the people making the decisions in some sense have to be held to even higher standards. Because I mean, they're not coming in as people signing terms of use and participating in an event. They're actually designing the rules, designing the integrity structure, making sure that there's a level playing field for all participants. So the ethics at the administrator level is perhaps even more important than ethics at the athlete level, because the athlete is transacting with sport, but an administrator has a long-term relationship with sport, which actually cascades down right through the pyramid of sport.
Yeah, you have said that in the book. Now, Nandan, tell me, is an administrator more powerful than a sportsman? I mean, a sportsman spends his life, he gives his life, brings glory, but he is dominated by some administrator who would have come into running the sport, say, 2 years before this sportsman's retirement. So, how do you balance that? I mean, how can a administrator call the shots and dictate it to some of the greatest sportsmen?
Yeah, no, I think this notion of power over other people is very heady, and lots of administrators perhaps enjoy that notion of wielding power over extremely gifted and successful other people. And that's just human nature in some sense. But can we move beyond that and see even administrators playing roles of service? Because at the end of the day, governance is a service, and sports needs that service of governance. It is not that you can remove this governance layer and sport will work, because it's not self-governance. It's actually governance by neutral, independent people making rules, applying them. So in theory, it's a wonderful structure. But it's when you allow sort of the practical realities of the day to overcome the values and ethics that you want to imbue into institutions that you come up against some of these challenges. And even more so in a country like India, where in many ways the talent pyramid and the talent ladder has many missing rungs. So in many ways, the I would say where governance needs to be better is also exploited by athletes. So some people who use privilege, some people who move up with the patronage of one or two people, and that in some sense further embeds this power relationship. If someone has succeeded thanks to a particular administrator or selector, that's a lifelong dependence that goes on. So when you do not have meritocratic structures where people are simply able to progress through sport by dint of their talent, this builds also and reinforces some of the power structures. So, I mean, I would say as we professionalize, we get more administrative structures at the more local levels, at the state levels. Hopefully, some of these power disparities disappear, and that athletes also do not need to rely on patronage to actually progress. But it is a reality, and I mean, we are all human. We all enjoy power over other people, particularly successful other people, and it is something I try and address in the book to some extent.
Yeah, to a large extent. And Nandan, I mean, do you realize from the time you would have started as a budding sportsman wanting to do well in cricket and say badminton, whatever, do you think that sports is losing the romance part of it because of so much of commercialization? So the administrators becoming so powerful, and like every sport, I mean, there is overkill. Nothing like cricket. Cricket is every day you're watching being played, but other sports also are there is an overkill.
Hmm.
So how,
I,
how
Yeah, and I mean, when I was a young athlete, it was hard in very different ways. So I think any change, and we've seen some very significant trends, which is the commercialization of sport, the technologization of sport, where there's much more technology in sport, the governmentalization of sport, where the government is taking a very deep interest in how sport is developing and evolving, and in many ways, the medicalization of sport. So where new things are happening, not just from a sports science perspective, but also from misuse of medicine in trying to gain unfair advantage. So these are all trends that have both advantages and disadvantages. They've taken the human, I would say, the quest of sport forward in many different ways. Athletes are better prepared and aware than ever before. But we're also dealing with what you could call a hyper competitive environment where there's huge rewards for the people who win and very little for the contenders. So you could argue that in this phase, particularly Indian sport is growing in a very top-heavy way, where there's a huge amount of emphasis given to elite sport at the very top, huge bounties and rewards if you win an Olympic medal and other things like that. But if you move down a few layers, even livelihoods are challenging for quite a few athletes. So building balanced development and building that sports pyramid at all levels, whether it's the district level, whether it's the state level, replenishing club sport in many different sports. I think all of that becomes critical in the next phase and the next journey if we want to be a sustainable, healthy sporting nation. And it's not very often success is measured by medals, but I think there are many different metrics to look at a sports ecosystem and say whether it's healthy or not. And medals aren't the only one.
Yeah, very true, very true. And I mean, going through your book, there were so many anecdotes which really move you. And but why is it, Nandan, that most of our success stories are of athletes who compete on empty stomachs, and then we go on to say we are a sporting nation? We are not fair. In many matters, we are not fair.
Yes, and I think we're seeing that more and more, which is the sport as livelihood is critical in India. And if you do not understand sport as livelihood, you haven't understood Indian sport. And I think there's a very famous quote of someone who said, any child who's going to drive in a air-conditioned car is not going to win you the next medals in India, right? So that hunger is real hunger, actually expressing in trying to find a way out of challenging situations. And but that is also the beauty of sport, where it's not something that we should aspire to is just have people playing sport because of the challenging situations they're in. But it does speak of the power of sport. And there's a statistic which says that in India, to emerge from poverty, it takes 7 generations. And we are one of the, I think, behind on many of these metrics. But if you see sport, in 1 generation, you can move from a challenging background. We've seen so many fantastic athletes change the trajectory of their lives. It changes the trajectory of their own families going in the future as well. So there is this magic of sport which is able to pull people out of situations, and I think that it creates a level of aspiration because neither you nor I or nor anyone else chooses where talent falls. Talent falls indiscriminately. It can fall in a wealthy household, it can fall in a not so wealthy household. It's what you do with the talent and whether that burning desire is combined with talent. But the place where most of us can spend our time is in creating those opportunities and pathways. Because even the stories we hear are all anecdotal stories. And in some sense, to romanticize them and to overdo the romance, it does a disservice because it actually suggests that everyone genuinely has a chance. The reality is, from these difficult and challenging places, some people make it, but it's not that everyone has a fair chance at doing it. Many people are excluded along the way as well. And that is really one of the areas I do try and address in the book, of trying to build a much more universal notion of sport, not necessarily just obsessing about medals, World Cups, and other things like that. Because if we want to take Indian sport forward, it's about building a sporting nation, not building a 20 or 50 or 100 athletes to get on the podium. That is an element of it, but a wholesome, sustainable environment is much, much more.
So what will make India a sporting nation in your view?
I think it's all of us. And that is why the book is, do we care enough about sport? Do we care enough about governance? If something is off, do we just brush it off as an issue? An issue like most recently, it was found that India tops the tally in anti-doping violations, rule violations. #1 in the world. We have a huge issue with things like age fraud. Young people competing in events which they should not be competing in after falsifying their age documents. All of these, I mean, we read them in the paper. Do we do anything about them? Do coaches do anything about them? Academies? I think the change in culture happens if all of us care, because it's a public domain. And if the public cares about the public domain, it's like a public park. You can go walk in it, destroy it. No one cares. But if you replenish it, keep nurturing it, beautiful plants can grow, but it needs constant nurturing. So can we all be givers as much as we are takers from sport? Because sport has a lot to give us, but it needs some love, care, and attention in return from each one of us. So it is not about sitting back and waiting for sports governance to change. If we want that to change, we have to demand it. And I think every single Indian has to ask for something from sport, but also give sport something that they have to offer. And it can be many different things.
Nandan, you have had a ringside view of Indian sport. So do you think, are we ready to host Olympics? Is that the way forward? I mean, holding Olympics, what kind of, how will it propel our infrastructure? To some extent, yes. But what kind of sporting culture will it introduce?
Yeah, so I think it's an opportunity, but it's an opportunity if we take that opportunity in a wholesome manner. If this propels us to just obsess more and more about how many medals we're going to win at that Olympics, I think we would have lost the opportunity. This is an opportunity to frontline sport, but sport in a more universal context, saying that how do we use this to propel, you use the word propel, and that's the right word. How do you propel this to a frontline activity rather than a marginal curiosity? So how do we get people at the very bottom of the pyramid just moving more? Greater amount of physical activity in the population, redesigning our cities to be more walkable, to be more usable for sport. How do we get absolutely everyone a chance, if you can call it a right to play? And the top of the pyramid has to nurture the bottom of the pyramid. And I think there have been many examples of how do you build a legacy program for an Olympics. And if we can focus on that legacy program, in some sense, the Olympics becomes a good excuse to build a sporting nation rather than the only reason to sort of pursue the sport seriously in the next 12 years is to be at the Olympics. It becomes a potential inflection point where, let's say, the sports ministry, sports governance, all become frontline issues because we care enough about sport. And it is a potential catalyst, but I don't think it is a solution in and of itself.
Yeah. And Nandan, there was a suggestion in one of our meetings, if you remember, that there was a suggestion to have one window clearance for everything, from hosting an event, all the permissions should come in a single window clearance. Would it be possible in our system?
I think it's a challenge. If you look at the way any sports event is held today, the number of both local as well as national level clearances required is very significant. And a lot of people ask, why do we so rely on the government, highly bureaucratic sports setup? Is because we've set up sport in a very complicated way. So ease of doing sport is very high. And I don't mean that only in hosting a major significant event. In fact, a lot of play in modern Indian life is permission based. You ask your parent, can I go out and play? You ask a club, can you please give me the court even though members want to play at this time? So we're in a the default is not play, the default is not sport. And how do we unlock a lot of those shackles? It's only if I think there's a conscious effort on each part of each of us, whether you're a parent, whether you're a school principal, whether you're a city administrator, whether you're running a federation. How do we make movement, physicality, and sport the default? And if some challenge comes along the way, we all sort of overcome that challenge. But right now, the default is sedentary behavior. We have a few wonderful examples of people who go and push the boundaries, and they go and push the boundaries on behalf of us. But why aren't we doing it ourselves, right? We don't need to wait and feel good about some other Indian succeeding, or India can do it because Neeraj Chopra can win a medal. I'm also capable. I just didn't try hard enough myself, but I feel happy about that. But why isn't Neeraj Chopra inspiring you, me, and other people to get out and play more and ensure that our children are living healthier lives? And that is the real opportunity of sport, where elite sport plays an ambassadorship role, but we are all able to enjoy the legacy and the glow of the sporting achievement of our heroes, and we revere them, we respect them, and we appreciate the multiple sacrifices they make along the way. But I think to respect them is about actually adopting the lessons from them in our daily lives, not just saying nice endorsement or nice ad and thank you for winning the medal on our behalf.
True, true. And of course, the whole book is very compelling and engaging. I particularly like one reference to the IPL match in Bangalore, where two stalwarts of Indian cricket, Kumble and Srinath, were struggling and wondering how to get the garbage cleared, because they were the municipality people, since they didn't get IPL tickets, they refused to clear it. So, have you, this is fine. I mean, this was a one-off incident where it was brought to notice, but it happens, it's rampant. I mean, unless they give free tickets to these agencies, they don't work.
Yes.
So how can we get rid of it? I mean, is there a way you can suggest with your experience? Is there a way where this complementary passes structure can be done away with?
No, I think it's probably at the heart of a lot of different things going on. And the more complicated we make holding these events and make it challenging to even build a sustainable sports event, the more we allow, I would say, political capture. Because the only person who can actually unlock all of these is someone who has power, political power beyond sport. So when a lot of these trappings go away, you can have a slightly more professional environment. And if we really want, I don't have a ready solution. I mean, if I did, it would be some magic bullet I'd be selling to everyone running a sports event. But I think the consciousness and awareness that sports sustains based on fanhood, on all of us going and supporting sport, whether it's at the IPL level or even at a domestic level. that spectatorship counts and building that connect between participant and spectator in multiple different ways. It could be through technology where there's more fan engagement. It could be turning up to events and really making the voice of the public heard in the discourse. I don't think you can any longer take the fan for granted. And it's one of the chapters I talk about. The fan has moved from a mute spectator who's very happy even to stand in a stadium or to sit on concrete grounds to someone who's actively asking for literally a seat at the table, not just a seat in the stadium. So there is an evolving demand, I would say, of better services, better conduct. And my optimistic side of me would say that that is naturally going to play out in it becoming easier to do business because there are more professional lines open, there are more professional administrators coming into sport, and there's a recognition that there is a huge pot at the end of this rainbow if you get it right. So if there is value, you will do things. And perhaps for a long time, all of these decisions were being made when there was really no value at the other side. So it was just going through the motions. But if there is something valuable at stake, maybe there is an alignment that happens where everyone understands they're working towards a much larger project.
Yeah, and then a couple of more questions. One is, do you think we respect our fans and sponsors? Honestly, I mean, we are seeing them from very close quarters. Do they get the respect they deserve?
If you're asking the question from an Indian sports perspective, and if you're asking whether sports governance bodies respect fans and sponsors, I would say sponsors definitely there's a much greater respect. There is a greater understanding that it's not just about the money; it's about a certain quality of sponsor also brings value to the sport. I mean, we've seen more recently, if you look at the sponsors of the IPL, it's a Tata versus other brands that have sponsored in the past. And there's some value to a good brand coming in. And I think there's much greater appreciation of what sponsor management, sponsor engagement, and sponsor deliverables are. We're getting more mature in certain sports. In other sports, there is still a long way to go in delivering the value. So in a commercialized environment, I think we are taking sponsors quite seriously. Fans as a concept, I think there's a great seriousness about it. But when it sort of literally when the tire hits the road and you go and see the state of some of the stadiums, the ticket buying experience, you get the sense that there's a feeling that fans are going to come regardless of what product you provide them, and fans are obliging. So there is no consequence or yet for poor fan experience. Well, I think that the demand is so far outstripping the supply that I don't think anyone yet faces the brunt of fan anger or fan disappointment.
Yeah, and finally, Nandan, published by Penguin, a very respected publisher. Which chapter you find close to your heart? I mean, you loved writing and enjoyed it. Of course, the whole book is there, but there has to be one particular chapter which you would say you did justice and you loved writing.
There were quite a few chapters actually, but one of the ones that stands out, or perhaps if you give me the permission, I'll talk about two. One is should Dhoni own the helicopter shot? And I think people can connect with that. So if you come up with something new yourself, should you have some intellectual property right over it if it's so unique? So that was I found that a lot of fun to write. I like intellectual property. It's something I practiced in the past. And also having played the sport, you understand some of the dynamics of how sport works, how you innovate, how you improve, and bringing the theory, the practice, but also my knowledge about intellectual property came through in that. Another chapter I really enjoyed was to ask the question about the archery at the Olympics. And the last Olympics in Tokyo, they were displaying the heart rate data of the archers. It was done with the consent, but it was done in a very unique way, which I'll leave the reader to read in the book how they did it. But the question is the relationship between the private life of an athlete and the public entertainment, and where are we going to draw the lines? So how much of the inner life of an athlete are we going to expose in the name of entertainment? And I found that quite an evocative chapter of thinking about the future and the role of the athlete as one, an athlete, two, as an entertainer. And what are we going to expect from the athlete moving forward as there's more technology, there's more enablement of understanding what's going on inside the athlete, not just externally in their performances.
And before I let you go, sport serious business or entertainment?
I think it is serious business because it is entertainment, but it is to me much more than that. Also, it's a hugely important public domain, which by the title of my book is Boundary Lab, and I use that quite consciously. That most people will accept that it's helping us test our human boundaries. How far can we jump? How fast can we run? How far can we throw? So those are the human boundaries. We're putting our best athletes in the world. But what we're also doing is testing a lot of the norms and laws and rules before they actually come up in our real societies. Not that sport isn't part of real society, but it acts as a little bit of a sandbox. And I think when we understand and appreciate that, we'll give much more care and attention to what's happening in sport. And I'll just give one example to end, talking about the notion of gender. Who is male and who is female? There's very few other places in public discourse which are actually discussing that. But sport has to do it because almost all sport is defined by male category and female category. And if you are ignoring what is happening in sport, you're ignoring perhaps one of the most important debates on gender that is happening in worldwide. So the importance of sport is not just as business, as entertainment, but it is this valuable sandbox where we are testing so many different aspects, consciously or unconsciously. And my hope is that the book makes us more conscious of all of the battles that are going on in sport and why they're important, not just in sport, but also downstream in society.
Right. And to our viewers and listeners, would you say this is the brightest phase of Indian sport? I mean, in terms of there is very good infrastructure. The quality of sportsmen has improved. Administration has also improved. We are getting so many foreign coaches. So, would you say before the final question is that is this the brightest phase of Indian sport?
Depends on what you define by bright. It's a good lawyer answer, so you don't give a direct answer. It's
we are going to Olympics with hopes of winning medals.
Yes, so I mean, in that sense, yes, it's bright. What is very bright certainly is the degree of ambition, and I think often ambition drives our behavior. So there's high ambition among athletes. I don't think anyone is going there just to compete or saying I've qualified for the Olympics is good enough. There's high ambition and desire to win medals and a belief that those medals can be won. There's also high ambition at the governmental level of what we think we can do with sport and where that fits into the national discourse. We believe that it's possible to build a nation using sport as a frontline activity. So in those senses, absolutely. We've seen good governance, the green shoots of it. I would like to see a much greener garden grown on governance. I would like to see much more growth of private enterprise. I would like to see many more states take up the cudgels. We've seen a few good states take up sport quite seriously. It would be good to have more local context and local development of sport and not complete reliance on the central government to drive the national agenda of sport. It should become an agenda for each of us, but also all of us at more local institutional levels. And to me, the central issue is, can we be more ambitious about building sports institutions? Because sports achievement is a product of solid institutions and good processes. I'm optimistic that once we understand our own ambitions and that ambition can drive a long-term agenda, a lot of these other things also are capable of falling into place. So it is bright with the potential to be way brighter.
And then I forgot one question. Doping is such a menace. Don't you think doping offenders should be dealt with strictly?
I actually talk about that little bit in one of those chapters. I think the anti-doping regime still is a little bit treating people as innocent offenders in many cases. It gives, on the one side, it's very strict insofar as strict liability, but on the other side, it isn't necessarily treating this with the seriousness it deserves because it's looking at it as a violation against your competitors. But actually it's a violation against the public as well. And I don't think the public is seen as a stakeholder in lots of these integrity violations, be it doping, be it match fixing. And we've seen multiple elements of that where match fixing today, there's no criminalization of match fixing. Even with existing evidence, people get away, maybe with a few years ban, and are back in playing sport, back in commentary, back in sports administration and coaching, and age fraud as well. So I think you have to begin to see these. If you see sport as a public domain, you will see a lot of these offenses actually as public offenses. They're not just offenses against the person who came second or third. They're actually offenses that impact people who aren't playing sport, potential sponsors, the public, people who are watching, people who are aspiring to become sports people themselves. It is an element of public cheating, which I don't think we've taken as seriously, not just in India, but anywhere in global sport.
So you have, with your legal background, you think we have sports laws in place to take care of all this?
I don't think we have sports laws in place yet, but I'm optimistic that we will soon have them, and I hope to participate in some way, shape, or form and to contribute what we can. It's also a provocation to young, smart lawyers to throw their hats into the ring and help build laws, regulations, institutions, and understand the broader public service you can do while building all of these. So I'm quite eager for the next generation of administrators to come through. Some of them may be lawyers, some of them may be from other backgrounds, but I'm excited about the next generation, and I believe that we can have a new generation of sports administrators who really enjoy what they're doing, are good at it, and put the public interest first.
Good, Nandan. So you can take the first step towards to getting all these good people together for the sake of Indian sport. And once again, thank you very, very much. It was a wonderful time. I loved speaking with you. I've loved the book. And once again, congratulations on it's a very different book. And I would recommend, like I said, every sports lover should have this book.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. And I mean, your passion has come through all of your writing and all of your work. So it's a real pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you. Thank you, Nandan. Thank you very much for coming on our show. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.